You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. It's Thursday, May 15th, 2025. I know I'm not the only one who checks traffic conditions every morning before I go to work to figure out which route has the least amount of delays. I-4, I-4 Express, 417, 408, and then there are the city streets. Commuting through Central Florida requires planning. Here's Maria Cortez describing the route she worked out to get from her parents' home in Kissimmee to her job as a parking planner in Orlando.
I would make sure to order the Uber by like 6:30. It takes about 10 minutes for it to arrive. So then by 6:40, I should have been out in the road. I get to the Disney Springs transfer station about like 7, and then the bus would arrive about 7:07. That's when it should leave. And then I was at work by 7:40 if there was no traffic, no issue. So from the time I left 6:40 to 7:40 in the morning. Yeah. And then afternoon, depending on which bus I took, then that could be, if it was right at 5 p.m., I knew I was going to be home by 7, things like that. So I had to plan my life around.
Things improved for Cortez once she moved closer to work. Now she lives near downtown Orlando and relies on an e-bike. Chase Fiore's family has their own system worked out for the work week. He's a volunteer member of our community advisory board.
I live near the convention center, and I work down near 192. And so I have to go down I-4 every day onto Disney property, off Disney property, and then pretty much reverse back the other way. So basically, an hour of my day is spent living in that little section of I-4 right near Disney Springs. And then 3 days a week, my wife works up here in Winter Park. And so she doesn't have a car. So she'll Uber to work, and then I'll drive up, go pick her up, and then drive back down. So that's another hour on I-4. So on days that I'm doing that, it's 2 hours of sitting in I-4 traffic.
Even though it adds up to a lot of time spent commuting in Central Florida, it's still a better option for Fiore than buying another car.
I look back last year, and we spent about $660 just in express lane tolls. And so now we're trying we're literally changing our route every day to try to avoid using the express lanes or using the turnpike. So we're spending even more time on I-4 because, you know, that $1.50 that you spend every time adds up really quickly whenever you're doing it a couple days a week, or you're doing it in two directions a couple days a week. And in the grand scheme of things, that's probably one of our smallest expenses. I mean, the fact that we're paying for an Uber, up to Winter Park from the convention center adds up really quickly as well.
Whether you're driving, biking, or taking the bus or train, we are all investing our time, energy, and money in Central Florida's transportation system. Central Florida Public Media explored the expense of commuting in our region through our in-depth series, Central Florida Seen and Heard, Costly Commute, that culminated with a live panel discussion at the Art and History Museums of Maitland last week. This afternoon, we're bringing you part of that conversation. Everyone in this room got here, one way or another. Show of hands if you would indulge me, please. How many people here took the bus? Okay, I see a hand. How about Sunrail? A few more hands went up. Rideshare, we're talking Uber or Lyft? Okay, I don't see any hands going up. How many of you drove? That would be the majority, and it looks like drivers won this one, which really isn't surprising at all because that is how most people get around Central Florida. Depending on where you're coming from, this time of day, maybe the weather, driving can be slow. It can be costly in many ways, and I'm sure we're going to get to that in a little bit. But first, let me introduce our panel of experts to you. I'll just go down the line. Gary Huttman brings more than 30 years of experience as a leader in Central Florida's transportation industry as Executive Director of Metro Plan Orlando. That's a transportation planning organization for Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. Next to him, Emily Bush, Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida. That's a nonprofit that advocates and educates on active transportation, safe mobility, and multimodal transportation. And Emily is also an adjunct professor at UCF teaching land use and planning topics. Last but not least, Eric Grimmer on the end. It's a representative with Orlando YIMBY. YIMBY stands for Yes in My Backyard. That organization works to improve livability, affordability, and mobility of Greater Orlando. And I should mention, he's also chair of Orange County's new citizen-led board. It's called Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission. Basically, they're tasked with holding public hearings and making recommendations on transportation and expenditures to Orange County commissioners. Okay, I'd love to start by just getting a feel from you all on the quality, the state of transportation in Central Florida. Scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 the best. How would you all rank the system here and why? I'll just go down the line and start with you, Gary.
Probably a 2 or maybe a 3.
Why?
Well, because we're making significant investment. It's arguable whether that's the right investment, but we are putting a lot of money into transportation. We have done a lot of work on transit and looking at providing options for people, whether they choose to use them or not. The difficult part in doing that always comes down to the price tag. We've done a number of studies in the region, all that are kind of sitting nicely on a shelf. But people were excited when they were underway. And what kind of deflates that enthusiasm is the price tag every time.
Same question to you, Emily. Scale of 1 to 5. How do you rate?
Probably a 2.5. I'm going
Okay.
to split it in the middle like Gary. And part of that is not just because of the infrastructure improvements that we've been making, but the significant changes in how we're now talking about people walking and biking to places and getting to the first and last mile connections to transit. And kudos to the partners that have been building dedicated bicycle lanes and have been putting in shared use paths and really thinking about the other modes of transportation, not just the automobile. So I have hope in the direction that we're headed with the projects that have now come out of the ground and the studies that sitting on the shelf or being implemented have those types of features in there. So I'm hopeful that we'll get to a 3.5 soon.
Excellent. And Eric?
I kind of feel the same way Emily does. If I were looking back at what we've done so far and how we've invested in transportation in Central Florida, I would say it's a 1. But if I'm looking for the future, I think we're trending more towards a 3 for some of the reasons that Emily mentioned. And to me, one of the biggest problems is up to this point, and one of the things I've always talked about at Transmac, but also as a member of Orlando YIMBY, is up until this point, I feel like we've lacked balance in those significant investments that we have made. We have mostly prioritized the investment in car-based infrastructure here in Central Florida and Orange County. And we see where that has gotten us. It has gotten us congestion. It has gotten us environmental problems, stormwater issues, causes a lot of problems and really hasn't solved any of the issues we have as a growing metropolitan community. But looking forward, I do see some of the things that Emily has mentioned. We are the different conversations that people are having. An anecdote I always throw out there, because at Orlando YIMBY, we advocate for more investments in public transit and bikeable and walkable communities. And when we started, I've been there for almost 4 years now with our organization. And just the way the Board of County Commissioners has changed in the conversation. The anecdote I throw out there as evidence of that is about 1.5 years ago when there was a roadway conceptual study that the board was reviewing for I think it was part of a road widening project, but there was also some bike and pedestrian elements to it. And on that study showed your typical Central Florida bike lane, painted bike lane, no protection for the cyclist whatsoever on, a 45-mile-an-hour road that really no one should be using, if they value their life. And Mayor Jerry Demings, Sheriff Central Florida, says, "Excuse me, Orange County staff, I see that this bike lane does not have any sort of protection for cyclists on here, and we keep hearing about that from our residents. Why is that not the case here?" And almost kind of blew my mind, oh my God, Jerry Demings is talking about protected bike lanes on the Board of County Commissioners. It's those small things. I think we're still waiting. I'm still waiting a little more for those big improvements, those signs of progress, but it's kind of those small signs and the different conversations that are being had that I know we're having an impact. And at Transmac, we're having those same sort of conversations about what can we get with more investment in our public transit and our bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So the conversation is changing. We still need to take that conversation into more action, but I feel like I really seen a change these past couple of years in that.
I should have warned you guys, I was going to ask you to participate, but if you would indulge me, I'm just wondering how you feel in the audience, show of hands on the scale 1 to 5, 1 being the worst. Could you just hold up your hands for me, how you would rate transportation as it is in Central Florida, starting with 1? Oh, a few hands went up. How about giving it a rating of 2? And rating of 3, right in the middle? How about a 4? Interesting. I don't think, 5? Okay, had to make sure.
Got to be fair. Got to be fair.
Oh, you saw a 5? Okay, we had one person hand go up with 5, but I didn't see any 4s, and 1, 2, and 3 was the majority, which sounds about in line with what we're talking about here. So not exactly scientific, but I think it kind of makes the point that Central Florida doesn't have a stellar reputation for having great public transportation. We get complaints about buses that don't run frequently enough, the time it takes for people to get to that final destination. When it comes to Sunrail, there aren't stops at or near where people want to go. It only runs Monday to Friday. Many areas, pedestrian safety is a real concern, like you were just mentioning, Eric. Gary, why is it so hard to do public transit correctly here?
It costs a lot of money, is probably the biggest effort. I mean, we do market research every couple of years, and we did it last year. And we consistently find over 90% of the respondents to our surveys. This last survey, we had over 3,100 respondents. And over 90% of those favor more money, more investment in transit. But that's not reflected in initiatives to generate dedicated revenue to fund transit. It's not, you don't see it in the ridership numbers. Some years ago, Lynx had a study going on of a route optimization study. I was a big supporter of that, and that was to look at what kind of service could we provide. I mean, ultimately, it would have looked at what kind of service could we provide if we didn't try to be everything to everybody. And that's hard to say that, but if you think of transit as a utility, I mean, you don't expect to move out into the country and have city water and sewer. And I have the same belief with transit service. If you can't live that far away from attractions and expect to have city-level service. But you could have that if you sort of shrunk the area. We often hear of Pittsburgh as being compared, as being a good example of an effective transit system. And they serve a much smaller, more compact area geographically with probably over twice the number of buses that we have in our system. So it's cost and efficiency and how the system is operating.
Okay. I have a lot of follow-up for you. Let me start, since you brought up Pittsburgh. Eric or Emily, are there other metropolitan areas, either in Florida or nationally, that are doing it right?
So many are rolling off the tongue right now.
Right, yeah.
No, it's difficult, and it's fine. I just want your opinion.
Yeah, I would, maybe Atlanta, but that's a much larger animal, much larger city. What I would really say to kind of capitalize on what Gary was getting at too is, from an urban planning standpoint, we keep building outward. And we don't focus on development where transit is currently, where we want to have transit, where it should be. And I think that land use and planning play an equally large role in how we support transit in order to get more people access to it, for it to be more convenient for them to use, for them to feel more comfortable using it, so it's not such a great distance that they have to go out of their way. I was just chatting with Gary, and I live in a rural community. I'm on septic, and I have a well, so I don't expect transit. But I'm, 5 or 6 miles away from the DeBerry Sunrail station. but it's not convenient for me to access it. And if it were, I would probably use it. And so just developing where we have existing spines, I think, would help us then not just put investment into those existing systems, but be able to expand where we know we're going to have nodes of development instead of just trying to capture where everybody is going to be living. And I think that controlling sprawl development is a good first step.
Emily, shockingly, we're going to agree again here. I think the question, Richard, was what was one of our biggest problems, and to me, it is the land use.
Okay.
I got into this great local advocacy space, with the YIMBY as a housing advocate, but you quickly realize that housing and transportation, go hand in hand together. You can't do one without the other. And one of the biggest problems with our existing public transit system is that we don't feed them potential riders by building a ton of housing, near those stops, especially those major stops. Talking about Sunrail, the land use around some of the Sunrail stations is no wonder there's no ridership. You go to the Sand Lake station and it's surrounded by industrial. It's like, who is supposed to be a rider for this at this station? You go to Sanford, the Sunrail station's out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there. So it's like, for transit to be successful, we have to feed it potential riders, and we absolutely have not done that. And then the other issue would be that Gary talked about was investment, and funding. And I'd say our work at Transmax so far, I think the problems 1 through 5 at Orange County transportation are funding. So funding is always an issue, but we haven't prioritized the funding in the way that I think we need to. So up until this point, we're always going to be limited by funding, but how do you prioritize that funding? And that's one thing Transmac is looking at. How are we choosing to prioritize our projects? And in my perspective, at this point, up until this point, it's been way too focused on, car-based infrastructure and new roads, widening existing roads. And I would say I'm not anti-car, but what I am pro is a balanced transportation system. So even if we never get a cent of additional funding, which, by the way, we absolutely do need, but even if we never get that, we can still choose how we're prioritizing our existing dollars and put them into projects and things that will actually improve our transportation system. And I think that we found up to this point, what we have done has not improved things.
I want to talk to you all about funding, about investments, priorities, and Sunrail. But before we move on, let me stay with this land use theme for just a second. And Emily, you have experience working in urban and regional planning and community design. Is it even possible? Can we take what we have now and adjust it so it is more accommodating to these alternate modes of transportation? It's not like we're dealing with this blank piece of paper. Is it even feasible physically?
Absolutely. It certainly is feasible, and a lot of our communities are already doing that. But there's a balance, right, with the public investment and the public policy that we make. The private sector has to come in and accept that, and it has to be, it has to pencil, right? The private developers have to be able to make a profit. Unfortunately, right, that's the world we live in, and sometimes it's not feasible. Sometimes the local government puts too much onus on the developer in order for them to do the right thing, and so part of what I teach at UCF and part of what I do as an advocacy organization is not just try to support walking and biking infrastructure, but looking at the land use that supports those that walk and bike and where that needs to be. And there are several communities up and down the spine of Sunrail, up and down major thoroughfares and corridors that are changing their comprehensive plans, that are changing their land use and their development requirements to support more density, more housing to support transit ridership. But that equal flip side needs to be that we're seeing more investment into the public transit. It kind of goes both ways. And so without seeing that, development tends to shy away. They tend to like to do more parking because they're just not sure. And so that's something that there's a balance, right, with all of that. But I do think we're headed in the right direction. I think that communities like Maitland, like DeBerry, have made significant strides. There's lots of construction around the DeBerry Sunrail station. They are doing an excellent job right now, really focusing development in that area. And the city of Orlando has done a great job as well. Already dense, they're really making sure that development continues to occur along that spine. And I think that all of us should support that, right? YIMBY.
Emily Bush is Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida. Eric Grimmer is a representative with Orlando YIMBY and Chair of the Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission in Orange County. Gary Huttman is Executive Director of Metro Plan Orlando. There's more ahead here on Engage. Metro Plan Orlando's 2024 Regional Transportation Survey found safety is a primary concern of Central Floridians, even though many admit to unsafe behavior on the roads. We dive into making our transportation system safer and how to encourage more people to actually use alternative forms of transit. And what works for you and what doesn't when it comes to commuting through Central Florida? Let us know. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org or send a talkback on the Central Florida Public Media app, or you can text 833-793-8633. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Access to transportation can either reduce or create hurdles in employment, education, equity, environmental protection, and overall mobility. Engage hosted a live panel conversation at the Art and History Museums of Maitland last week to explore the true costs of commuting in Central Florida. We continue our discussion now with Emily Bush, Executive Director of the nonprofit Bike Walk Central Florida, Eric Grimmer, a representative with YIMBY and Orange County's Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission, and Gary Huttman, Executive Director of Metro Plan Orlando. Gary Huttman, is the goal less reliance on cars, or is the goal to provide more options?
To provide more options. It's behavioral. You can't force people to use something that they just don't want to use. But again, I go back to our surveys of there seems to be broad support for transit. Mm-hmm. And bicycles and walking and that sort of transportation as well. But again, things are pretty spread out, and it doesn't work for everybody. It's much easier if you can afford it to hop into a car and drive across town than it is to wait for a bus and then transfer to another bus and maybe another bus in order to get places.
So Eric, how do you appeal to people in Central Florida to actually use these different modes of transportation?
I think they want to use it, and that's reflected in the survey data that Gary is talking about. It's the reasons why our bus and Sunrail aren't filled is not because people don't want to use them. It's because they may not be convenient to where they live, they may not be reliable, they may not be consistent. And I'm sure there are things that can in those organizations that can be made better, just like everything else. But I think it comes down to a lack of funding. And I think we've seen. One of the things we talked about at Transmac was something that county is doing right now called their Accelerated Transportation Safety Program, which was $100 million over the next 5 years into various transportation projects in Orange County. And one of those, they gave $45 million to Lynx over 5 years to create an entirely new route from Orlando, the airport, to Disney Springs, and then also increased frequencies on some of their more popular routes. And just in that short amount of time, they've already shown an average increase of 22% in ridership. With just, and the grand scheme of things, a small amount of additional funding. They're getting about $7 or $8 million per year for those enhanced frequencies and new route. So you're already seeing what they could do with more. So I think the demand is there if we had a system. It's kind of like a build it and they will come thing. And you definitely see that also with bike lanes. Oh, people aren't going to ride a bike. We have bike lanes and people use them. You see all around the country that when jurisdictions start to build actually physically protected bike lanes, the cyclists show up. And one of the benefits we have in Florida is that we have a climate, bear with me here, that you actually can, in the advent now of a motorized electric scooters and electric bikes, as an owner of 2 electric bikes, I bike all year round because it's pretty breezy when you're and you see you're the next generation of students of kids who are using these mobility devices. Now, they may not be using them in the most safe manner right now. That's a whole other conversation. But I see the potential there, right? So if we build safe spaces for these other vehicles to get to places that are close to them, I think in this country, 50% of our car trips are less than 3 miles. You can do a 3-mile trip on an e-bike or an e-scooter in just a few minutes if people felt safe and felt convenient to do so. So to me, that's the future, and those are the ways we can entice people by building safe environments for them or making things more convenient. We have to make our transit more convenient for the people to choose to want to use it, and to have that choice. Right now, there isn't much of a choice, especially if you're at Sunrail, if you don't live close to a station, if you want to go somewhere, it's not available on the weekends. Links, you may have to transfer two or three times. So the people who unfortunately tend to use, especially links, are the people who have to. But if we really want to make a dent in our transportation system, we have to make people want and choose to use public transit. And we have not invested in those systems enough to create those choice riders.
Emily was just listening to Eric talk about using a bike year-round. How is it a safe environment for people who choose to do that? How is this community for biking and walking?
So I would say generally, you are taking your life into your hands, heading out on the street to walk and bike. We run several safety programs and different campaigns that educate motorists mostly on the laws. It is a requirement as a driver to stop at a marked and unmarked crosswalk to let someone cross the road. And we work with our local law enforcement partners in what we call Operation Best Foot Forward, where we go out with now 9 counties and the various city law enforcement jurisdictions and enforce the driver yield laws. We educate. And that's the main purpose of it. And more often than not, when we pull drivers over, their answer is, I did not know that that was a requirement. And so we give them some literature as to why, explaining the state statute both in graphical format and literally spelling it out for them. But it also, when we implement that program with education and with some low-cost engineering improvements, we find that the people that are using those crosswalks or using those facilities feel a lot more comfortable. And so they're more likely to use those places where we designate people to cross the road, because drivers are very much aware that those are people there. During COVID, we saw a big increase in the number of people that took to the trails. We saw a significant increase to the point where some of our trails are now designed much wider than they were when we built them originally to handle that capacity, which is great. And a lot of drivers are familiar with where those trail crossings are, but not necessarily where school crossings are, or where park crossings are, or maybe where a residential is across from a Publix and somebody just wants to go get a gallon of milk or a carton of eggs. And so those are things that we continue to try to educate through the programs of Bike Walk Central Florida. And I think we are generally getting safer. To Gary's point, it's behavior change. And it took us 30 plus years to get it to be normal to buckle our seatbelts. So we still have a little ways to go to normalize people stopping for people that want to cross the road. But our programs and the services that we offer our communities, we're working diligently on that. And I hope that with more people feeling comfortable to use their e-bikes or to walk to the various locations that they want to go, we'll get more individuals out there and more drivers will be aware that people do walk and bike in their community and they do have every right to cross the road.
Yeah, I have to follow up with you when you said you're kind of taking your life in your hands. How do you counter that? Why would someone want to look at these alternate forms?
Sometimes they don't have a choice.
Good point.
Sometimes they don't have a vehicle. Vehicles are very expensive to own and operate. For a low-income individual, it's a minimum of a third of their income. At a minimum. Insurance is going up. We all know that, not just for our homeowners insurance, but for our auto insurance. Car loans are more expensive. The interest rates are more. It's more expensive to maintain and operate a vehicle. And so e-bikes and walking and biking is a very cost-effective alternative. In addition, there's a lot of younger population that isn't interested in driving. It's not safe to drive, too. And so a lot of people are taking, they're wanting to walk and bike, but the infrastructure isn't there. So there's gaps in sidewalks, there's gaps in bike facilities, and so they have to take to the road, or they have to be put, unfortunately, in very precarious situations to where they have to put their life into their hands because they just don't have any other alternative. And that's not fair.
I want to weigh in too on the safety issue. I had a discussion with a staff member from the DOT. We had a summit, first of all, a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago now, at the Lake Mary Events Center in the development of our next long-range plan, and wanted to get a sense of our committees and the board and really roll up our sleeves and work for a morning. But I had the opportunity to be at a table with the DOT traffic engineer, and we had a discussion about the return on investment for some of the safety infrastructure improvements that we're making. And is there a real return on that? Because there's so much discussion right now about behavioral change. I mean, it's one thing to feel safe or unsafe if you're vulnerable on the road, if you're walking or biking. But I kind of feel that way even getting here, and driving on the interstate is kind of threatening sometimes. When you look around you and see how people are driving. I've taken, I try my best lately to be, and probably for the last year or so, to be a more conscientious driver myself, and kind of hope that rubs off on the people on both sides of me. But it's just as simple as, there's a tendency if someone comes in front of you, look how often the people that are behind them speed up so that they get right on the rear end of that car that merged. But if we all would just say, we're all in this together. Let's play fair, and give a little bit, and not be so upset over those kind of things. I think that we would improve our safety statistics significantly. We don't talk about accidents anymore because there are no accidents. There are crashes. But when I do drive on the interstate and there's something that shuts the interstate down, the first thing that goes to my mind is that, someone was distracted. Someone was misbehaving on the road and caused that accident and caused hours of delay for everybody else.
Emily Bush is Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida. Eric Grimmer is a representative with Orlando YIMBY and Chair of the Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission in Orange County. Gary Huttman is Executive Director of Metro Plan Orlando.
Every day I get in the queue to get on the bus that takes me to you. I'm so nervous I just sit and smile. Your house is only another mile.
Next, hear from the community about their concerns. Plus, our panelists weigh in on the biggest failures among leaders shaping the future of transportation in the region. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media.
But can I buy your magic bus?
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Our transportation system enables Central Floridians to connect. Engage hosted a live panel discussion last week exploring the true costs of commuting in our region with Eric Grimmer, a representative with Orlando YIMBY and chair of the Transportation Mobility Advisory Commission in Orange County, Emily Bush, executive director of Bike Walk Central Florida and an adjunct professor at UCF teaching land use and planning, as well as Gary Huttman, executive director of Metro Plan Orlando. We also turned the discussion over to our live audience at the Art and History Museums of Maitland to get their questions about mass transit in Central Florida before our panel. So I asked the audience in the beginning how they got here, and I have a question for you. Before we turn it over to you all to questions, for your own questions, I want to close this panel discussion by asking, to those of you who drove here today, show of hands, would you consider other forms of transportation that we talked about if it was as quick and as convenient? Oh,
Hope everybody.
okay. That was pretty much everyone who drove, more or less. So let me open up to the audience now. What questions do you have for our panelists? Someone will come around with a microphone.
Oh, thank you. First of all, thanks for hosting this event. It's been fantastic. One comment I'd like to make, the two comments. One about the education piece we talked about. I fully agree. But it made me think also there has to be an emphasis on education of those people running their scooters, electric scooters, and e-bikes and so forth that are found. It's just a plethora of that nowadays. It's just exploded. And as a driver, I'm scared when I see a 12-year-old kid on a crossing streets. Zip, you have no response time as a driver, much less than you would have if that person would be walking. So it would put us in a very awkward situation. So I fully agree with what you said, but I think there has to be an emphasis on that as well. If you want to comment.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I would say at this point, especially with the scooters, like it's a disruption to the transportation system. And whenever like disruptions come in, there's always those growing pains that we have to figure out, how to accommodate, this new use, and which I think could really be a game changer for replacing those short car trips. We do have to figure out the safety portion of it. I see it all the time in my neighborhood. I live in the Avalon Park area, so we see it all the time, issues. A kid today was just, hit on a scooter in Avalon Park. Thankfully, no one has died yet, but it does honestly feel like a matter of time, so we absolutely need to figure it out. But I think the very worst thing we could do is what I see some people advocating for, which is banning them. It would be such a mistake because they have to be used safely. We have to figure out how to do that. But, so I'm with you 100% on that, but one thing we can't do is get rid of them because it could be a huge game changer for micromobility in our communities. And I also just one more point just on the good biking infrastructure you get to experience. My point sitting up here is not that we don't have that anywhere in Orange County. I just want to see it everywhere. That's where I live, because I cycle every day with my kids to school, so I don't have that where I live, and I want what you have. I want that where I live, and I want it for everybody in the room.
And if I could add too, we have to remember that those children that are using those e-bikes and e-scooters, they don't drive. They don't know the rules of the road necessarily. So part of the programs that we implement at Bike Walk Central Florida try to go into elementary and middle school schools and educate on stop signs and those types of safety types of implement. Make sure that they're wearing their helmet. Make sure that they're following the rules of the road, because they're probably not taught that. They're given this new toy for Christmas or their birthday, and then they have this freedom and this independence. So we don't necessarily want to take that away from them, but we need to make sure that they're educated on how to use that properly. And a big kudos, I have our events manager who runs our Bike Walk Kids program here today, and she's been to several elementary and middle schools, and we've heard this over and over again, that these children just don't know the rules, and afterwards we hear from the educators that it does make a difference, but it takes repetition. And so we all have to, as a community, come together and make sure that we're grandparents or parents, that we're educating and reminding them of those rules of the road as well.
So I had a lot of things I wanted to say, but I have instructions from my wife to limit it to one. So I think the top down, the mindset needs to change. I still see that it needs to change. This whole idea that, okay, we're too spread out and that we can't expect public transportation to be available everywhere. I mean, if we start with that mindset, it's never going to get done. I mean, you look at Western European countries, you go to Europe and look at how you go to a village. You have a train going to that village, you have a bus going to that village. Once you get there, it's like a spider web of a network. And they do this right from the beginning when it's developed. The thing about developers building infrastructure, one of the things that should be done is any new development, if a developer wants to build it, they need to pay to have a public transport system reach that part. If they cannot pay or if they cannot contribute to that, they should not be allowed to build. Because what they're doing is just going ahead and spreading everything out, building it, and then now we are at a place where committees and boards and everybody, they're thinking, okay, if it's too spread out, we're not going to build. we're not going to go there, then guess what's happening? That we have the problem we have right now. That whole attitude, mentality has to change. We need 100 Erics in these
careful.
boards and planning committees and all that stuff, so that at every given point there is a pushback on this, so that people change that thinking. I mean, the boards and the committees and these councils and all these people, they need to be put on a plane, sent to Europe, okay, for a week and given a budget and said, you need to survive. Watch them. Come back and be like, oh, wow, that's what we need here. It can be done. It should be done. When you want a stadium, $400 million, no problem, right? Since I moved to Orlando, the tolls have gone up like 300%. I have to pay $13 round trip to go to the airport and come back. Half of that is probably going to build stadiums. I don't know where that's going. But every time there's like a 50-cent increase. Money is not an issue. Developers are coming up. The only thing they're needed that the government needs the developers to do is build an entrance out to the road. That's it. You add to that they need to be able to contribute to a public transit getting to that community, then you'll see money coming in, because they're making money hands over fist. They can contribute.
I'll just say that I've never heard a public elected official who has gone to another location with impressive transportation systems come back and criticize it. I've never heard that. They always come back thinking that, man, we're missing the mark here. But it takes the political will to do that.
I think that's also the problem, is that there are many tiers of political wills needed. You've got the county and the city and the commissioners and the planning boards and the state, and all of them needing different permissions and different processes. It needs to be streamlined. And again, we need 100 Erics in those positions.
Can you handle
Can I
that?
ask one clarifying question? So that was one thought that you had right there that you just shared. That was just one thought. Okay. We could be, I'm just curious to see what other thoughts were. And also, I have to report back to my wife when I get home. I'm sorry, we need 98 more Erics. I'm not sure how she's going to feel about that, or even how I feel about that. 2 seems enough these days. But kind of going back to what Gary said earlier about, I do think our investments do need to be context sensitive, and we need to make smart investments. There are places, as much as I love public transit, I don't think we should run public transit all over Orange County. I don't think a bus line should go all the way out to the rural east. That's not a smart, in my opinion, a smart use of those dollars. Now, and even in Avalon Park area where I live, I don't necessarily think we have the density to justify a huge transit investment. But does that mean we get nothing over there? No. Talk about the rural east, we need to make sure they have safe roads and sidewalks. People should be able to just walk around their neighborhood without fear of getting hit. Or in Avalon Park, one of the great great things about living there is being a planned community. There's so much within just a couple miles. But we don't have safe bike and pedestrian infrastructure. If we had a protected bike lane on Avalon Park Boulevard, our spine of our community, there's so much is off of, how many people would, instead of getting in their car to go to our Walmart or our Publix that we have in the community, how many would choose to get in a bike and do it that way? So, since we have limited transportation dollars, and we probably will continue to do so no matter how much we invest in it, we do need to be smart, and it does need to be context sensitive. So,
And if I could add too, what we need to challenge our elected officials. We need to make sure that we're voting for people that understand this, and we need to hold them accountable. And you can see this up and down from the federal government to the state government to your local cities and counties, but we can no longer just sit aside and just let these individuals vote based on who might be in their ear. We have to go and be the voice. We have to be Eric.
this is getting weird.
So we are going to take one last question because I promised him the opportunity and we're at time.
Okay. Simply stated, I've heard a lot of a return on investment in business and how much money's coming back. And we know that you build a city park, you don't really see any return on investment on that. So do you feel in some way more of a direction toward a public administration attitude? We'll say MBA versus MPA, which MPA, is about the public benefit. There are a lot of safety, a lot of other things. I've been involved in that for over 30 years, state trooper. So anyway, the biggest thing is I would like to bounce it back to you four up there who have a lot of experience in this, especially when it comes to Florida, and is what's our biggest failures? Because everyone's coming up with 2.5, 1 for numbers. Where are they lacking in their focus? Is it because it's like dollars and cents is easy? We can build bike lanes and other stuff and spend a lot of money, but electric bikes, educate through enforcement. Where is it, do you think, our biggest failure that our leaders are not doing when they're thinking, hey, I want to improve the deadliest highway in the United States, I-4 corridor near Orlando, is that, which is a huge image thing. If you know, I mean, I know that, and I avoid it because it's dangerous, it's deadly. I mean, it is when you're rated that. So where do you think our biggest failure is right now? And if you were to tell our county, state, local officials what they should be talking about and how they should be thinking, is what they should do now from here on out.
Well, I'll say that I think there was a failure some years ago to not approve light rail in the area. You know, Sunrail, I'm a Sunrail supporter. I use it. It works for me, works very well for me, and I ride it just about every day. And I kind of bristle when I hear people talking about low ridership. It's not back to where it was before COVID, but it's getting there. I mean, I get on into Land. That station opened up in August. And I noticed yesterday morning that, you know, of course, you know, if you've not been on Sunrail, maybe many of you have, but they have like pods of seats of 4. And before COVID, those would oftentimes in the morning and afternoon would fill up pretty much. Well, that hasn't happened yet, but I have noticed recently that by the time we get to the Sanford station and certainly to the Lake Mary station, people are wandering the train trying to find a comfortable spot to sit. And so I appreciate that. But I say all that because Sunrail takes a beating sometimes when it comes to ridership. But keep in mind that we didn't build Sunrail. We bought some existing track and put a train on it. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't work for everyone. And had we approved Sunrail some years ago, that I would consider to be a failure probably in the region. It would have been built in a way that Central Florida wanted rail to be built and to operate. And then on, you know, growth is just happening so fast that, and projects are so expensive that even if you had the money in the bank, you know, and you had a highway project that needed to be done, by the time you studied it and purchased the right-of-way and did the engineering work and constructed it, you're still looking at probably 7 to 10 years before it's there. And so that we just keep getting further and further behind.
Emily or Eric, anything to wrap us up?
Our organization worked with Orange County during the 2022 Transportation Sales Tax Initiative. And we were on the communications committee and we're working with what were we going to communicate to the public about how to sell the sales tax to people, especially at a time when there was inflation and there was a lot of other things going on in the community. And one of the messages that we came up with that really never got out into the community, which I'd like to take the time today to say, was that every investment into safe walking and biking infrastructure, every investment into public transit saves you time as a driver because that's one less vehicle on the roadway. That's one less, right? That's less congestion that you might deal with. That's a better holistic community health that we'll have from an environmental standpoint, from a fiscal standpoint. And if we don't start recognizing that now, and to Eric's point, and like I said earlier, really making sure that our elected officials from the top to the bottom understand that, then we will lose and we will continue to deal with the same issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So it's not really about the return on investment. It's about making sure that we hold those that are representing us accountable for what it is that we want to see in our community. And I hope that each and every one of you that have joined us today will become champions to support not just transit and not just safe places to walk and bike, but to also drive and to make sure that we really echo the fact that there needs to be that balance and that funding also needs to follow that balance as well.
That was our panel discussion at the Art and History Museums of Maitland, wrapping up Central Florida Public Media's in-depth series, Central Florida Seen and Heard Costly Commute, exploring the true costs of commuting in our region. You can find the other stories in our series on our website, cfpublic.org. That's all for today's edition of Engage. Hey, with hurricane season approaching, we want to know your concerns. Are you still dealing with the effects of a previous storm? Have you made any changes as a result of previous seasons? Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org or send a talkback on the Central Florida Public Media app or text 833-793-8633. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All of our shows are available on demand at cfpublic.org. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.